The Washington Post reported that Trump's called his acting attorney general, Jeffrey Rosen, almost every day about the so-called fraud in the aftermath of the election. The attorney general's top aide took notes about what the former president said on those phone calls. For anyone trying to get to the bottom of whether or not Donald Trump was trying to improperly weaponize the Justice Department to help him stay in power, it would be important to know exactly what was said on those calls. And today, we found out. The New York Times was the first to report today on the contents of those notes about Donald Trump's calls to the attorney general after the election. According to the Times, Donald Trump called his attorney general, as well as his deputy, on December 27th of last year to ask him about claims of voter fraud that DOJ had disproved. That deputy attorney general told the former president that the justice had no power to overturn an election. To which Donald Trump replied, quote, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me." Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me. Since the New York Times first broke the story this afternoon, these handwritten notes have now been made public and turned over to Congress as part of a separate investigation into the former president's conduct after the election. So here we go. Joining us now, Katie Benner, who covers the Justice Department for the New York Times. She's been way ahead of everyone else's reporting on Donald Trump's post-election attempts to pressure the Justice Department. She was the first to report on these documents from the House Oversight Committee today. Katie, good evening. Good to see you, my friend. It would seem that the 9 pages of handwritten notes released today are not the only notes taken by DOJ officials that are relevant to a House Oversight Committee investigation. It's a committee that is likely to receive more as it investigates the Trump administration's efforts to reverse the election. What's the picture as you have it now?
Sure. I think what we need to remember is that those committees, including the House Oversight Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee, they've been asking the Justice Department for both documents and the testimony of former officials basically since the beginning of this year. The Justice Department began the process of handing over documents a few months ago. This is sort of from the latest batch. And just now, the Justice Department said that former officials are allowed to testify and they are not going to invoke executive privilege, which means that Congress now has far more access to information than it ever had during the Trump administration about the former president's behavior. We're going to see the Justice Department allow information to flow, and we're going to see Congress to press as hard as it can to get everything it can, documents and testimony.
The language used by Donald Trump in his phone call to the Justice Department had similarities to the language that Donald Trump used in his phone call with the president of the Ukraine. I'm going to read you what he said to the call with Zelensky. I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I'd like you to have the Attorney General call your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Then he calls and leans on the attorney general of the United States, the acting attorney general of the United States, to just come up and find some fraud, and I'll take care of it from there. Do we know from your notes what happens, what Trump means by I'll take care of it after that?
He says that I'll take care of it, himself and our congressmen, as what the notes say, Republicans in Congress who are his allies. So presumably they would use that statement from the Justice Department as a cudgel to both attack Joe Biden, but to also sow real seeds of doubt into the outcome of the election. One of the things, to your point, that we see as a parallel between Ukraine and what we saw in the notes today is that Trump understands that people like the president of Ukraine, that the Justice Department do have real credibility with audiences he cannot reach. So it's essential that they carry his message so then he can run with it. In both cases, it was more important for those respected entities to make public announcements than it was for them to investigate. One of the things that Trump said in the notes to the Justice Department officials was, I don't expect you to actually overturn the results of the election yourself, nor do I expect you to necessarily investigate all these things. Just say it's corrupt and leave it to me. And again, as we saw with the Ukraine impeachment trial, you saw Gordon Sondland testify, the former ambassador, and he said then all of the conversations he had with Rudy Giuliani and others, it was always that the Ukraine president was supposed to announce the investigation, but it was never really important that he actually started or follow through with it. Again, it is the idea that the utterance is made that is important to Trump, because he knows that he can use that mantle of credibility for his own ends.
I want to show some of the lines from the handwritten notes in here. On page 2 of the notes, it says, people are angry, blaming Department of Justice plus for inaction. DOJ failing to respond to legitimate complaints and reports of crimes on page 3. Also on page 3, you guys may not be following the internet the way I do. Supposedly that's what Trump said to the folks on the phone call. This is electioneering fraud. And from your own reporting on this story, you write, in a moment of foreshadowing, Mr. Trump said, people tell me Jeff Clark is great. I should put him in, referring to the acting chief of the Justice Department Civil Division, who had also encouraged department officials to intervene in the election. People want me to replace DOJ leadership. What was that comment about?
So we know that, Jeff Clark, who had been an official at the Justice Department, he was introduced to the president at some point by Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. We do not know when this happened. We just know that Clark really clicked with the president, in part because he too felt that it was probable that the results of the election were not true, even though his own colleagues at the Justice Department had investigated, lots of different fraud claims and conspiracy theories, and themselves had investigated and found them to be untrue. Clark still believed them. So he and the president had a comity. And so when Trump is saying this to Justice Department officials, the acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen, his deputy Richard Donoghue, what he's not telling them is he's already been speaking with Jeff Clark, that he's already been talking to Jeff Clark about what the Justice Department can do for him. And what the two officials don't know is that just a week later, they're going to be back in the Oval Office fighting for their jobs with Jeff Clark in the room as the president decides whether or not to fire them all. One of the things that Donoghue does say to the president on this call, according to the notes, is he says, you should have the leadership you want, but just know it's not going to change the outcome of the election.